Hey everybody, we are not going live soon anymore. We are live. You can take that ticker away. Welcome everybody. We've got a bunch of people here with us, and let me introduce everybody. We've got Scott M2 from dreamSTATE. We've got JP King. We've got Scott Lepore, Steve Castellano, and Jason Nolan. We're going to start off today with a little talk about learning and how people learn when it comes to sound, synthesis, music, what have you. With Jason, we're all open to questions from you guys. That's what makes this thing happen well. I can take comments and flash them on the screen like this. So thanks, Real Void. And with that, I think we'll get started. So we have some studio performances. And we're going to talk a little bit about next month's Frequency Freaks workshop, because we've got a pretty cool exercise, I think, coming up for that. Post any questions that you have, and use an @ to Scott Lepore. And I know that will work on YouTube. I have no idea how the comments are going to work on the Facebook side of things. So if you'd, I know we can all see all of the comments. I don't know how the @ is going to work from the Facebook side. So, Jason, let's get started. Do you want to take Jason, do you want to take a moment and introduce yourself, and tell us what you do and why you do it and what you like about it?
Okay, yeah, I'm Jason Nolan. I'm director of the Responsive Ecologies Lab, ReLab behind here. It's weird, I'm now talking only to myself, but what the heck. I'm a professor of early childhood studies at Ryerson University, and we developed the Responsive Ecologies Lab about 4 or 5 years ago, as a way to study how we interact with the environment around us and how the world responds to us. And we're sort of taking a material-centric approach to learning. So it's trying to figure out how we learn about the missing sensory modalities that really don't get taken up in K-12 education, the sort of things that we end up having to learn on our own, and exploring that sort of informal learning environment and the informal communities around them, and seeing how we can sort of bring some of that learning back into K-12 education, yet at the same time trying to research the communities of practice, like what you're doing with electronic music and sound, to see what we can bring back to those communities to help them better understand their own processes and practices. And that includes everything from helping people document their own practice and understand it in a larger educational context, but also working with performers and educators and industry to see how we can improve the overall community itself. Sound good?
Sounds great.
That's great.
So one of the things that kind of fascinates me every time I talk to you, Jason, is we start going down this learning path, and I end up learning a little bit about myself and how I learn, and that usually translates into me doing something sound-wise on the gear that you can see behind me. And I find that really cool. It's inspiring. It allows me to learn about myself and how I learn. And as electronic musicians, we're different from other musicians. We have a bunch of different instruments that we have to learn. I have a bunch that are over here on my right, and a bunch more that are over here on my left. They all work very differently, and it all takes a certain amount of time to learn each of them well enough before I'm comfortable bringing them out and performing with them in front of an audience, or even recording with them. They're very inspiring at first, and you're doing all kinds of cool stuff. But then it's like, okay, how can I structure this and get this working with my voice and the music that I'm making? How do you find that plays in with kids? Oh, somebody's
nice sound effect.
Yeah.
Well, thing is, the problem with children versus adults is all of you pretty much have fallen into electronic music through sort of either situated interest or an intrinsic interest in what you're actually exposed to. The first time I saw a synth or heard a synth, it blew my mind, and I had to learn how to get one, make one, engage with them. So they weren't brought up in school. We weren't taught about sound except if you're taking a music course, and music is a completely different bag of wax. These are weird things that make blips and bloops, and we have to make sense of them all by ourselves. So with children, they never really get that opportunity to explore sound the same way adults do who trip into electronic music. They're usually overly programmed. They're usually presented with music in very limited amounts of choices. All the music that children experience are created by adults. And imagine talking about children's culture when children actually don't create children's culture. Adults create children's culture for them. And so they don't have any sense of what it is that we as adults do when we trip into these sort of spaces.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and it takes me back to when I was first introduced to the music of the Canadian Electronic Ensemble, and it blew my mind. It opened things up for me in a way that was completely unexpected, because it is, and this is even me coming from a background of jazz. Improvisation is something that in the jazz idiom we're very familiar with, and it's something that we all strive to learn and do and create in music. But when it came to electronics, and the stuff that I heard coming out was so much of a soundscape, but it was a soundscape that made musical sense, and that flowed, and that moved in various different ways. And they asked me to play with them, and I enjoyed it so much I never left. So I'm still playing with the band today, and it's been like 25 years or something like that now. So that whole exploration of live electronic improvisation is something that really drives me in my own music. But what about approaches to learning different instruments? There's this whole thing about learning a new sonic language from an adult perspective, because we have been trained to hear music in a certain way and do music in a certain way, and music has a beat and a rhythm, and it may be an odd beat, or it may be an even beat, or an odd meter, or an even meter, depending on the nomenclature you want to use.
But it always starts.
But kids don't have that.
They do, because it gets imposed on them. And what we forget is that children are, from day one, scientists of their own exploration of the physical world around them. Yet we very quickly stop them from doing that and started directing their attention. There might be some parents here who might feel bad about this, but start directing them to doing what the parent wants, listening to what the parent wants, liking what the parent wants, and also then performing, because childhood is very much about performance to adults, that they're actually properly engaged and properly participating. And if we actually let children explore things the way that you did when you moved out of jazz and into this electronic stuff, the adult would stop them immediately. If all of a sudden you just said, wow, white noise, and just kept that going on because you loved it, how quickly is it going to be before a parent or a teacher tells you to stop it? And so, but it's totally normal for us when we're listening to pieces that other people produce. It's just wall of sound, sounds good, because we're able to make these autonomous choices, because we've separated ourselves somewhat from adults and parents. But it's also happened after 15, 20, or 30 years of you being inculcated in a set of norms that are not imposed on you, but you've sort of self-selected into. I don't like jazz, never liked jazz, hated jazz growing up, even played jazz instruments, but I just didn't like how it was structured until I found something that would work for me. And so that took me into my 20s before I realized the way into jazz. And that's not something that an average person would do. They tend to take the culture they're given, move into that culture, explore it to an extent, and very often they wouldn't get turned off by it and move into another musical culture. They might just grow from it. So you took your improv from jazz and brought it into electronic music. And I think a lot of people who started with an instrument may have done that because it increases what they can actually do. But how do you unlearn all of that previous stuff that inculcated you into a specific set of cultures? Most people I know still are working in some variation of 4/4 time outside of electronic music, even though electronic music doesn't require you to do that. It doesn't require you to stay with Western scales and Western rhythms. A lot of people tend to do it unless they actually grew up in a multi-timbral, multi-rhythmic, polyrhythmic space. Then they're more likely to do it. So there's that notion. I hate 4/4 time, and I've always hated 4/4 time. I now know it's because it's very militaristic, it's very Eurocentric, it's very just not me. And I naturally gravitated towards first 3/4 time as a kid, and then 5/4 time, and then 7/8 time, and then 9/12, and whatever. I love rhythms, but I love those other rhythms that have a lumberingness to them. Now, that's not something that most people would gravitate towards. A lot of people who show up here would, but a lot of people don't get those experiences to really find out what's going on. Sequencers that you get tend to play 8 notes. How many sequencers do you get that don't? I've got one here. The Music from Outer Space goes up to 10, but it doesn't really ever go up to 10. It usually goes up to 9. So all of a sudden that one starts breaking your rhythmic sense. So the tool that we've created, that we grew up with, tend to control what we can think and what we can imagine, because the tools have those limitations. So how do we design tools for young children that don't actually, from day one, conform to those sort of rhythmic expectations? And that's something I'm really curious about. So I want to build a step sequencer, but there's no way that it's going to be ending on a even set of notes. It's always going to have something odd, because it's that odd little extra thing that always catches me. Now, a child can self-select in a sequencer and reduce it, but if the default doesn't default to a Western rhythmic or tonal norm, then they're more likely to have to find the one they like rather than just take the one that's given. That makes sense?
Yeah, it makes total sense. And one of my favorite things to do with my gear here is take my Euclidean circles and run 3 of the outputs from Euclidean circles into a logical OR circuit, and take the output of that logical OR circuit and use that as the clock input for my clay sequencer or another sequencer. And you still get something that's tied to the clock that you're working with, but it becomes rhythmically a very different kind of thing.
And you built, right? It becomes unexpected.
Well, I expect it, but yeah, for other people,
it's unexpected. But you're not saying you're not going somewhere. You're letting something happen to, wow, I like that, or I don't like it, and then tweak it, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Apropos of that, Jason, what tactics do you have with the kids to sort of convert them from the discovery phase, where they engage with the instrument in however they sort of feel natural in doing so? How do you sort of start to introduce, structure, or introduce some concepts or whatever? Because obviously, as a parent, it was all fine and well, that my daughter, would finger paint. But, I'd want to sort of direct her towards mixing colors or bring some kind of structure to it that, I thought might help her advance or even understand things better.
Why?
Why did I do that?
We all think we should do that, but why do we need to do that? What is the necessity of doing that?
Well, presumably in the case of the technology that we use, it has to do with, the basics, some of the fundamentals, the electronics, a sound source into a sound modifier into an output, something like that. So I'm discussing more the the fundamentals, if you like,
right.
The functional fundamentals.
And we assume that they need to have these fundamentals, because that's how we grew up and learned, in order to get anywhere with it. Mm-hmm. But they tend to get where we led them rather than getting anywhere that they had actually might naturally want to go. So I want to give them tools to explore and play with, and I want that exploration to stop being intervened with by adult ideas of what should actually happen. Maybe that child who's finger painting is going to spend their entire life just with variations of the color red.
Mm-hmm.
And who knows what would happen. But no, we've got to get them into a color palette, and they start learning all these expectations. Next thing you know, they're doing maybe shitty work with a whole wide palette because that's what the expectation is, not finding out what they actually want to do and taking their own interests to completely what to us would be illogical extremes.
Right.
And what if somebody just never wants to move beyond two oscillators going back and forth with each other, and they become the greatest composer ever of two oscillator music? But they'll never happen because we've got to well-round them. We've got to make sure they're also learning the math. They also learn the counting. They also, so we start again, imposing our expectations on them. There's a concept that I work with that I really love. It's called childism. And it's a form of discrimination against children insofar as that the child's life is basically ordered by the goals and interests and needs of an adult. And an educational system, it's any and every adult, is more important in terms of learning than the child's own ideas, their own thoughts, their own interests. They sometimes might get consulted on what's going on, but they never really get to direct it themselves for any meaningful length of time. Montessori school, which has got lots of problems in terms of how they order children's lives, does bring in two really important things. And that's the concept, I phrase it as intentionality. I want to go and play with that thing. And then task dedication. I'm going to stick with that until I've done with it. And then I'll go on to something else. And parenting and schooling is usually not oriented towards those sort of things. Their lives are very much regulated by parental expectations, parental needs, or the needs of the institutions they're going to. Parents may give children free playtime, but after that, okay, now you got to go to bed. Now you got to go do this. So the child's life is really completely ordered to the needs of an adult. They have to do this. If you don't order a child's life based on adult needs, you'll probably get thrown in jail. Because that would be considered some form of parental abuse. You're letting your kids run up and down the street at 3 o'clock in the morning. Well, they want to. So if we did really let the child organize their own life, it would be a disaster for adults and a disaster for society. So as educators and as parents, how do we fight against that requirement to the best of our ability within the cultural context we're expected to explore? And if that child just wants to be banging pots and lids till the cows come home, well, one, we'll go crazy. But I mean, if we didn't go crazy, or we had a nice safe lock, like a room where we could know that the child's safe, not hurting themselves, not hurting others, not feeling abandoned, but could do whatever they wanted within that context, I think they'd be doing really different things than what would happen if we're always redirecting them towards expectations.
Hey, Jason, I just want to interrupt you for a second. We have a really good question from Laura Dickens in the comments on Facebook. Couldn't a kid engage with traditions and cultural learning so that they can reference them if they like, but also move away from them in their art making? It can be an educated decision.
Yeah, but it's a really good point, Laura, but the child didn't have any input on that decision. They don't get to choose. They're not really in a position to even have that discussion. So again, it's imposed on them. Now, as parents, we see ourselves as having the right to impose our culture, religion, and values and language on children. It's a norm. So that's going to happen anyway. The question is, are we going to have more widely exploring, thoughtful, creative children by actually fighting against that expectation as much as possible? Because they're going to get that forced sociality and forced socialization and compliance everywhere. So how do we create as many situations as possible where that isn't the case? That's what I'm working towards.
So then what do you see as the role of the teacher? Jason, sorry, what do you see as the role of the teacher, at least in the context of how you teach?
Well, the thing is, it's a bit crazy because half of you have to understand what the government policies and regulations are, what the parental expectations are, what your licensing requirements are, because you got to keep your job. So that, and you've got to work to all those time configurations. How then do you hack that to the best of your ability to actually create as many of those opportunities as you can? So as many autonomous decisions within a heteronomous space, basically.
I'm a little curious about tools and how you set kids up in environments to play. And given that oftentimes we're talking about modular synthesizers and that there's certain recipes, both traditional East Coast or West Coast recipes to create certain types of sounds and timbres. There's even an adult logic and tradition in how we play.
Right.
So I'm curious about that, and also like what kind of recipes have you made for kids that are the most freeing, creative, and playful?
Well, right now I'm sort of really at the early stages of it, because I've actually only spent the last 2 years getting my electronics music chops back up. I did electronic music back in the 80s. And I even got to take a couple of courses that Steve took up at York in electronic music, but then I dropped it as soon as it all went digital because I couldn't afford it and didn't know what to do. So I'm just getting back into things. But what I'm doing right now, up until COVID shutdown, is I was actually going in every week to an early learning center and sitting there with 3 pairs of bongo drums. And just sitting there, not running any activities. Teachers are doing their own shit. I just sat there and played the bongo drums for an hour. And I played different rhythms. I played it badly. And I just watched how the children engaged or didn't engage with me as they saw fit. And a lot of them came over and tried to ride the bongo drums like a pony or a race car. Some decided to take them apart. The only restriction I had was no magic markers, because some of them wanted to draw on them because it's a white flat surface. But they came over and played sometimes. Sometimes they just rested their head on the bongo drums and got a feel for it. Sometimes I'd see children way over there dancing or moving rhythmically to what I was doing. But I really was just there doing music. And if you find a lot of you in your own experiences with your children, if they're not running from the room when you're making your music, they might actually just be passively watching, passively engaging, or jumping up, jumping up and trying to mess with your shit because it's interesting. But I'm just there engaging in a practice, and some of them are hopefully coming over and engaging those practices with me. What I've been doing is basically taking mental notes all the way through of what they're doing and how I might actually create sound objects that would fit into those spaces. The bongo drum's a great one because it's just lying around. And they just, after about a month, they just started, when I came in, they just start, oh, he's here, nothing new. I feel like engaging, don't feel like engaging, coming and going. But what if I start creating more sorts of tools that they can engage with? So I love this question because this is the first object that I'm working on right now that is going to be one of those objects. And the key thing is it's throwable. It's meant to be thrown. It is what I'm calling a sonic throwable object. And the curriculum requires children to engage in gross motor skills and learning about things. So it's a great object to do that. It's soft. And so what I'm doing right now, with the help of Heidi Chan, is I'm building this circuit to go inside it. Hey, the camera's over there. And this is basically a Bluetooth unit with a device that senses motion, acceleration, 7 degrees of motion. And I'm going to stick it inside here. And then what we're going to do for fun is we're taking this data. We've already got it to the computer. We're now trying to figure out how max MSP to get that serial data into Ableton, and then just say, well, what sort of things would a child want to do with this if it was in a space just hanging out being a sonic thing? And what would be the ones that would fit closest to the type of interactions the child would already have with it? Because we can already see that they've been using this. There's nothing new about this. It's already part of their world. So they're going to pick it up and drop it. So what's pick up and drop it? What could that actually sound like within the space that the child's already experimenting? We could have it triggering a MIDI sequence, but that wouldn't make much sense to them. But what happens if it goes up when it goes up, the sound goes down when it goes down, and you drop it and it becomes a bit of a trigger? I shake it, what's going to happen? And when I throw it, what happens? So they're going to, it's designed to be thrown. It's supposed to be thrown and then has different elements. But I wonder if I really lob it a long distance, that's like a low frequency, describing a low frequency oscillation arc perhaps. So at this point, I don't really know what it's going to sound like, but I know what it could sound like. And then we'll find out with the children which one actually is going to be working. And it's also something cheap, and we could actually just sit there and throw them at each other because they would love to do that. But if that's actually part of their music curriculum to throw beanbags at each other, they're going to want to do that, and they're going to be curious about it and see what happens. Some of the other things I'm trying to do is trying to figure out like a sample and hold module that would only be based on the your pulse, because the pulse isn't a nice even rhythm. It's going to always be changing. And lots of people have little ear clip-ons that can go into modular and do that. But if they had to go and set a rhythm with their body, they'd actually get a sense of their own body, their own heartbeat in relation to what is coming out. So that's another type of tool we're sort of working And I'm trying to build a step sequencer that a toddler, I'm talking about 2.5 to 3-year-olds, no language, no expectation of theory. They're not going to understand what an oscillator is. But if they just had a board with a whole bunch of blocks, and as they're putting in the blocks, it starts sequencing things. And it's just made out of the wooden blocks they're already playing with. What would they do with it, and what would be interesting without being told it's particularly music or anything? Because they're already used to sticking blocks in holes. So if we just added sound to those, and sounds that they might be expecting, we could have a sense of what they might, if they're interested and want to engage in them. And over time, try and figure out what it is they like and what it is they don't like. And somebody just said this, it's fun. It's hilarious. Any time a child gets to do something they want to do, it's usually fun because they want to do it. And it's usually going to be unexpected to them. And they're going to start thinking about it and say, well, what happens if I stick 3 of them in? What happens if I throw this at the step sequencer? I don't know. Let's try it. So they're always being scientists. And what I always say is children build theories about things. They test their theories. They reflect on their theories. And they always keep trying it in increasing levels of complexity. And if we're locking young children, they're throwing things, they're dropping things, they're rolling things, they're making sounds. They're always testing the environment around them. How do we help them do that more and encourage that as a normal thing rather than waiting for what the adult wants them to do or how the adult wants them to do it? Because once the kid grows up after 5, 6, or 7, they're already so inculcated in the adult world. You can teach them about whatever you want. But the early years is to help them find out what their real interests are about. And if they're exploring sound, they may not become electronic musicians. They actually may get totally into Baroque and neoclassical organ. Like, who knows where they're going to go? They could end up becoming physicists of waveforms. It could end up, they're really hot for fluid dynamics. They could become the best bartender because they really are into how fluids move through space. I don't know. But getting them interested in the waves and flow and motion and sound and all of those things and seeing them as part of a larger whole means, and if they're into it, once they get up to an age where they're actually being taught, then they're already going to have a whole suite of tools and interactions that are a lot closer to the things that you guys already have now when you're exploring sounds. That's what I think.
That's really cool. One of the things that I find important when I'm trying to learn a new instrument is that it's a blank slate for me. It's something that I want to and I need to explore. And I've learned to approach each new instrument that I get as a blank slate. I wonder, how do we relate that? And I don't know exactly how I was able to do that and take myself back into that childlike mentality where it's a blank slate. I can do whatever I want with this. Let me try this. Let me try that. Let me try whatever. And it's one of the things that helps me learn a new instrument. I wonder if you have any kind of insights for people among us, most of us who are in the audience here are adults. How can we get ourselves all into that same kind of state when we're creating? Because it seems a particularly creative state as well.
I'd say you can't. Because we can only think we do and act as if we are. But we carry far too much knowledge and experience. This is something I'm putting together to play with kids with. It's a self-contained synth that's got just some basic stuff in it. But you would already start doing something with this that's predicated on your knowledge of it. If I saw this with a child, if I had these objects with a child, they're only going to work within the space that makes sense to them. When's the last time you actually found a microphone a microphone? I don't know how that works. And then you threw it? You're not going to throw it. You already know not to throw microphones because it's probably expensive. When's the last time you said, wow, I have a synthesizer. I have a glass of port. Let's just pour it over the synthesizer. A child would do that. You're not going to do that. You're not going to really be that open-ended. You're going to work within the constraints you've already got, wisely so, because you don't want to wreck a good glass of port or a synthesizer. But seriously, I'm going to go do that. I've got some old keyboards, and what's going to happen, and sort of circuit bending with my knowledge of electronics, what if I just started circuit bending with live circuits and a glass of sugary liquid? It may end really quickly, but when's the last time you actually just did that? That would be something that would be closer to the childlike.
I wonder, and I want to ask along those lines, Jason, you believe much in the idea of unlearning?
I think it's a really convenient trope to make us seem like we're really cool and hip and innovative. But I don't think it's. I think it's a trope, and I think you can work with it. When we were setting up all of us to have this discussion, I pulled out my oblique strategies, and oblique strategies are an adult way of doing what you were saying, Paul, of breaking up some of the expectations, because it says, let's go try that and see what happens. And so, yeah, I think it's totally possible. We have to build structures. And like, that's what Eno was doing when he was taking sort of that Eastern mystical notion of indeterminacy and throwing it into a box, was to build one of those systems, an adult system that would disrupt all of the expectations that we normally have when we're engaging in creative activities, to push us into new spaces.
Cool. I'm gonna make your screen big here, Jason, for a second, and maybe you can do what you did for us earlier and actually hold up a couple of those cards so that people can see the strategies that are on them.
The oblique strategies are 100 worthwhile dilemmas, right? And they're not really invented by Eno, but he sort of got them together. So grabbing them at random, I don't know what this one says. It says, it's upside down. Okay. Voice nagging suspicions. So what's bugging you that you're not saying? Give the game away. Don't hold anything up your sleeve and tell people what's going on immediately. Why not? The next one here is just carry on. Like, that means don't start thinking about changing what you're doing or tweaking it. Just leave it alone. Here's a good adult one. Make it more sensual. Your stuff is just too rhythmic and really rich. Oh, disciplined, self-indulgent. Make sure you're self-indulging in a way over and over again, and you don't just sort of give up into it. What mistakes did you make last time? Make them again. And this is one that I think Steve actually liked. There it is. Oh, I've lost it. It says, slow preparation, fast execution. So I'll stop with those, but those are all really interesting ways that we can challenge ourselves. And some of the work I'm working on with Kurt Thumlert at York University's Faculty of Education and with Heidi Chan is we're actually starting to build our own ideation decks, because you can build your own, that are leading towards certain types of explorations. And a lot of the things are things you'd already do. Okay, only 3 modules. You can only use 3 modules today. Okay, you can only use modules you hate. What are the 3 modules that upset you the most or confuse you the most? Find the thing that's most disruptive and then come to love it. Those are things that really take this idea of theory building, testing, and reflection and increasing levels of complexity, just like a child does, but we can actually do those as an adult. I've started playing 3-string guitars. I can't even play a 6-string guitar very well, but boy, does that make me think of things differently. How about, and a lot of people have done it, violin bows on strings, putting motors and actuators on guitars that just jump around and jitter. Like, those are things that we can use to explore that really are going to disrupt the way we're thinking. And then some of them stick with us, and some of this we run screaming from the room when it happens, which sounds good.
So we have an interesting comment from Sean Jennings over on Facebook. And unfortunately, I don't think we can see the whole thing here. But it is an interesting question and a statement.
I think the problem with them is that they don't meet some early years requirements in terms of children actually being able to always understand what they're doing and interacting with. Because I'm thinking with a child, when they're actually just taking something and dropping it on the floor over and over again, they're able to see the actions that they're doing immediately. They're immediately interacting with something. They're seeing the result of their actions. They're able to vary their reactions. They're able to build more ideas about this because they can understand what this object can actually do and what it allows them to do, and what are the affordances between them, the object, and the physical environment around them. So it has to have that level of knowability on their part, but also allow for an open-ended, unknowable outcomes. I love the lightsaber on a cell phone, but I don't know how it works. Just sound comes out and I move it around, but it's not really consistent because it doesn't actually sound like what it's actually doing. And that's going to be the challenge when I start putting Bluetooth devices in here. I want to figure out a way of doing it so that the child, when they're interacting with it, can actually have the theories, test them, reflect, and understand what they're doing and understanding the results of their interactions on things. This whole idea for me is it's basically physics. How do things move, and how do I make them move, and how do I redirect motion at a simplest level? And so they're already doing this. They're already learning about the physics of these things. If we added sound as another modality, as well as the tactile and the visual, then we're actually increasing potentially the complexity of the interaction. If it just ends up sounding cool and they're not sure what's happening, then they'll pretty much just give up and go play with something else.
Interesting. This is a really interesting topic of discussion. And like I said, when we started off with this, it's something that we kind of dive into every time you and I talk, and I really enjoy that. So thanks for your time today, and thanks for joining us here. And I hope you can stick around for the rest of the show, because we're going to have lots of opportunity for interaction and more questions from our audience. And we seem to have some people in the audience, and that's a good thing. And last I saw, it looks like they outnumber us as well, which is even better. So, Steve, you had made a comment a little bit earlier about Brian Eno and John Cage.
Yeah, the idea of getting we're adults and we're stuck in what we know how to do. John Cage famously said in an interview that he hates improvisation. And he may have improvised earlier in his life, but as an older composer, he avoided improvisation and requesting it from his performers, because he said improvising is doing what you already know how to do. And I think that's a really eloquent encapsulation of that idea that you put forward. But this idea of creating new music that is not guided by something that someone hammered into your head is what inspired things like the music for the I Ching, which in turn inspired Brian Eno and his oblique. His oblique, the cards, but also things like radio music, which was a score that told people when to tune and turn the volume on a number of FM radios, so it would sound different wherever it was performed. And that in turn, I know Tom Whitwell, who created the radio music module, is an enthusiastic student of John Cage's work. So for anyone who's looking to break out of stuff, there's a lot of his writing that's very engaging. It's very approachable, but yeah, a lot of fascinating ideas.
So we have a comment from Dakota Mellon up on the screen, and I just assume that most people know Dakota because just about everybody who attends Frequency Freaks at one time or another has at least spoken to Dakota. But I have to remember that we could be having people from anywhere tuning into us here. And so for anybody who's new and joining us, thanks for joining us. This is something that we normally do in Toronto face-to-face. And we hold these meetups monthly at the Array Music studio, and it's really nice to be face to face. I know that with all the isolation that we've all been going through as COVID makes its way around the world, has been tough on a lot of people. And I know that for me personally, I've really been looking forward to this session and being able to see the people who I can see, but also see the comments from the people who are watching. I left my COVID scruff from this week on purposely, to show that, I've been working alone and I didn't really need to shave until today. And then I kind of forgot and ran out of time. thanks everybody for your participation. It's one of the things that makes these things unique and a lot of fun for all of us who attend. And welcome to the new folks from wherever you are. Hey, if you're not in Toronto, why not post a comment and let us know where you are? It'd be really cool to see that. So moving along now from the discussion on learning and how kids learn and how we learn and how we try to unlearn and unsuccessfully, as Jason said, because we're always influenced by the things that we've done before. We have some video performances in a studio tour. I'm also going to take a minute soon to talk about what we're going to do for next month's Frequency Freaks workshop as well. So with that, I'm going to open the floor to JP here, and hopefully you're unmuted. Come on, unmute. There. Oh, you can override me. So I'm gonna play the video of your performance, JP. Did you want to set it up for folks? Tell us a little bit about what's going on, and then not too much, because we'll come back and we'll talk about it after it performs.
Sure. So what I'll say for starters is that if you've got the opportunity to listen to this in stereo, I'd like to really encourage you to do that. The piece is comprised of 4 analog voices that are being rhythmically sequenced through some kind of really complex generative patch. So there's a lot of tangled wires, and they're all speaking to one another. And so this is one of the first attempts that I've made at really a kind of generative piece. So every once in a while, I see my hand come in and tweak, and that's just making a small change. But for the most part, you're really hearing the machine itself sing. So I hope you enjoy, and stick around afterwards, and we'll talk a little bit more about it.
Cool, thanks. Hopefully this will work. Wow, I'm very relaxed now. And JP, you're muted. We need you to unmute.
Here I am.
Awesome. That was a beautiful track. It goes very well with the 40 Creek Unity that I'm drinking here. Thoroughly enjoyed that.
Thank you.
We, as it's tradition here with Frequency Freaks, we take questions for the performers after each performance so that we can all learn from each other. So if you have questions for JP, please just mention them in the comments and we'll do our best to answer them. The first thing I'm going to ask is, because I can do that, is what is the box in the bottom left with the red knobs on it? I've been really curious about that.
Yeah, so in the bottom left are like a white box and a cream toned box, and the cream toned box has got red knobs on it. Those are two pedals made by Hologram Electronics. They're guitar pedals, and the red knob one is called Dream Sequencer, Dream Sequence. Now, exactly what it does, what each of them do, is still a mystery to me. This is my first day playing with them. But my sense is that they're both some type of like granular resynthesizer. So the one up above is called Infinite Jets, and it creates this kind of like stable chord-like tone that fluctuates and swells in the background. And then the Dream Sequence is resampling the actual sequence coming from the modular synth and spitting it out in some new time sequence and form. And it's not being clocked by the main system. So it has its own rhythm. And I think about 3/4 of the way through, it really comes into its own and kind of finds a bit of a groove and establishes some rhythm within what is otherwise just this very floating and melodic ambient space.
Very cool stuff. We have a question from Gabe. He says a lot of sources of randomness in there. Can you talk to us about them? Maybe tell us a little bit about them and what they are controlling.
Sure. So I actually made a comment earlier while Jason was talking, and I said that I think random voltage sources have got to be the oblique strategies of synthesis. And the random modules, random voltages, are actually doing a lot here, but there's also a kind of intentionally randomly programmed sequence that's taking place. But I'll start with the random modules that you can see. I think the two primary ones are a woggle bug, which is up in the top, made by Make Noise, and it's spitting out 3 different random voltages that have been multiplied and doubled across. So in some cases, they are controlling some of the parameters of monsoon or clouds, which is again doing this kind of like octave pitched above resequenced melody, twinkling high note kind of thing that is coming out of mangroves. So there's 2 mangrove oscillators in formant mode, and they are being modulated by something in that mess, and I can't remember what. But they're fluctuating through this kind of formant structure that is triggering subharmonics. So there are these really bassy kind of growls that come in, and then there are these twinkly high notes that are those same subharmonics being resampled, but at a higher pitch. In addition to all of that, there's a sloths down the bottom left-hand corner. And sloths is not so much a random module, but described as like a chaotic module. So it's basically like this like infinite loop, circle 8, that shifts and flows and changes just a little bit with each passing loop. So you can think of it as like an unstable, very, very slow LFO. And interestingly, that is actually controlling a number of different features, but primarily it's controlling a couple parameters in just friends. And so just friends is up in the top, just to the right of maths. So up in that top row there. And just friends is a really interesting module in that it has 6 interrelated envelope generators. And they are going through their own kind of algorithmic pattern structure that is part of the internal architecture of that module. But the relationships between 4 different parameters: the time, the shape, the speed, something like that, are all being very slowly shifted and changed by sloths. And maybe I'll add one last thing. The sequence that's being played is actually just 3 notes across 3 octaves. And it is coming out of René. But René, as a 16-step sequencer, is only playing 15 steps. So it's 1 step short of that kind of even pattern. And those 15 steps are going into a shifty, which is a shift register. So it's taking the one sequence and splitting it into 4 different signals. And then each of those signals is controlling 1 oscillator. So you've got the 15 notes split 4 ways. And each time that cycles through, each of those notes ends up landing on a different oscillator. So it's got all sorts of very slow kind of chaos within it. But with just those 3 notes, I think that it manages to maintain some musicality. I'll leave it at that for now.
Interesting. Really cool. Really cool stuff. So if nobody in the comments has any further questions, we're going to get moving on to our next video. And our next video is a studio tour from Steve Castellano. And then we can talk a little bit about that, see if there's any questions, and then move on to his performance. So without further ado, here we go with that.
Hi, everyone. Steve here, and welcome to the studio. I'm just going to give you a quick clip of me talking so you can attach my face to my voice. And then I'm going to flip the camera around and give you a very quick tour of the gear here. And we'll see how long we can go without a cat climbing on or chewing either a synthesizer or me. All right, here we go. We'll start here with the desk, if I can get it all in the frame here. The main controller is a Kurzweil PC3K8. I was a big fan of the K2000 synth back in the day, and this is sort of the top of the line, end of the line unit. It's a few years old now, still a great controller and fairly good sound creation capability, although I've mostly used it live and not so much for recording anymore now that I'm doing the modular thing. This is Farfel, aka Fairfax, aka Bag of Sticks Troublemaker. He loves, I think, the feel of those buttons on his butt. So it's a fun game if every time you sit down to a completely new randomized setting on your controller. Behind here, we've got a bunch of stuff that I use about half of. Lexicon LXP15. I have it because I was in love with it 35 years ago and found it super cheap. I don't really use it that much. It's a bit noisy, but still kind of fun to play with. TC Electronics D2 because I love delay. Below that, the Focusrite Octapre Dynamic, which is my 8-channel ADAT input for the Apollo Twin unit. So I've got a total of 10 channels. I've done my best at wiring up a patch bay to serve everything without too much fussing around with cables. The Alesis, what is it called? Multimix 12R, mostly just a line mixer for monitoring. You have the modular setup, which many of you may be familiar with. This is the rig that I bring out to the Frequency Freaks gatherings when they're when they're happening. This is sort of the discard pile. That's unfair. This is the spare rack for everything that doesn't quite fit in the performance rack. A lot of my own builds and a lot of stuff I still use, but there's things like the terminal tedium that I don't think I've ever produced a sound with. Likewise, there's a micro Korg up here that makes a good paperweight. Also, occasionally as a controller for the TTSH. Couple Axolati units that I built and never use. A realistic MG1, ConcertMate MG1 realistic synthesizer by Moog Music. Not the actual unit, but this model was the first synthesizer that I touched with my living hands, and found this one through a friend at a store in Peterborough a couple of years back. Probably needs a bit of work, but maybe I have time to get to it now. Back over this way, we have the TTSH, the ARP 2600 clone that I built a couple of years back. Still use that pretty regularly. Below that, an Octatrack Mark I. I've had this for a few years. I still am not great with it, but I do use it a lot for kind of effects processing and filtering, looping, that sort of thing. It makes a great sound when you bang your head against it. Down here, we have the Metasonics units that started this whole business for me. The one on the lower left there, the TM1 Wave Shaper Ring Mod. It's sort of been reincarnated in a few different versions for a Euro rack. I think some of you might even own some versions of it, but there's also an oscillator, a filter VCA, and the TM7, the incredibly harsh distortion unit. Over here we have my baby, the Moog Sub 37. This is something I fell in love with the first time I went down to KnobCon. Amos from Moog was giving a demo of it. It hadn't been released yet, but as soon as he started talking about it and playing it, I knew I had to have one. So now I do. Up here we have an older synth, the Yamaha CS15. This is one of the ones that's, I mean to wire it up one day. It does not have a MIDI retrofit at the moment. It works, it makes sound. Like most of the stuff here, it's been well looked after by the folks at Synthswen, but it's not currently in use at the moment. You can see a Wurlitzer electric piano there behind the bike in the background. And over this way, the one that everyone's always excited to see, the Prophet 5 Rev 3.3. I've had this guy for, I'm not the original owner, but I'm going to say 30 years or so. If anyone remembers when Long and McQuaid had a store at Wilson and Bathurst, it was sitting there. They thought it was broken, so they gave it to me for a pretty good deal at the time. And I took it home and discovered that someone had just tried to load the patches in from a cassette, probably with a deck that was at the wrong speed, and it scrambled the internal memory. And in fact, it was fine. Let's see if it's still fine. It's a bit temperamental, but up here we have the Korg Monopoly, my first real analog synthesizer. And I'm the original owner of this guy. I got it when I was a teenager. And it's become quite a sought after thing. And Behringer's, of course, just released a clone of it. And there you have it. Thanks for stopping by. Thank you, Farfel, for not playing any solos. All right. Hope to see you all soon.
All right, very cool. Nice studio tour, Steve. Are there any questions from anybody, either on the panel here or from the comments? If not, we'll move on to Steve's studio performance. I guess we're all ready for the performance. All right. So with that, take it away again, Steve.
There. Order and dictionaries, catch sorts and place in alphabet. Order and most unteachable. Hold. Most unteachable. Hold. Of course. Most unteachable. Hold. Of course. That is the question. That is what most unteachable. Hold. Of course. Question. That's why it's been looked at
Wow, well done, Steve. I was just thinking to myself
Thanks very much.
that you're probably one of the most melodic modular synth players I know. If anybody hasn't seen his YouTube tutorial on U-scale from IntelliGel, you should, because it really is enlightening. I learned a ton from that one, and I know I've mentioned it before, Steve, but we're in a different time and place now, so I can mention it again. Does anybody have any questions for Steve, either on the panel or in the comments?
Steve, what was the vocal recording of? Sounded a bit like an old movie.
The vocal recording is, I believe it's the only known recording of Virginia Woolf. It's from 1937. My day gig is a writer, so I'm interested. I mean, I'm always looking for things I haven't heard before to throw into a piece as found samples. But this was a bit of a recitation that she gave on words and language and how words like being treated and how they don't like being treated. But it just had even aside from the content itself, it had a nice, just a nice quality, kind of set in the frequency range well. JP was mentioning that it's tied in rhythmically. What I've got happening is an occasional. I've got a part of one of those clocks going into the clock skip mode on in the ornament and crime in hemispheres mode. So it'll slice up those sounds in the morphogene, and I've also got a trigger from that into the play trigger of the morphogene. So things are being sliced randomly, but when it happens, it's on the beat, and likewise, that's how they're being played back. So it's still pretty random, but you do get some happy accidents with events happening on the beat now and then.
Okay, cool. I think now might be a good time to talk about what we're going to do for the June Frequency Freaks event. I had this idea that we would kind of tie in our episode this month on learning with the episode next month. And next month, our topic is going to be on collaboration. So we're going to have a couple of people from the modular manufacturer community on to talk about some of their collaborations. And I wanted to throw it out there for people who are part of our Frequency Freaks community to collaborate together as well. So if you wanted to send me an email, info@freakfreaks.com, or you can go to our website, frequencyfreaks.com or freakfreaks.com. We'll get you there. Use the contact form there. Send me a message. Tell me that you're interested in participating, and I will put everybody's name into I think we'll do some separate hats for this. And we'll work on collaborations. So include your name, include what style of music you would prefer to work in. I challenge you to not put anything there so that you might get partnered with somebody in a style that you don't normally work in, and that way you can learn and stretch a little bit. But if you really want to stick into one particular style, just put that on there as well, and I'll try and put you with somebody who is going to work in the same style as you, or who prefers to work in the same style as you. Or I'll put all of you in a hat together and pull you out randomly that way. The thing that made me think of that is actually going to be the topic of our last video, and I'll get to that when I get to that. But what I'd like to do now is I would like to bring in Scott. I'll bring everybody back onto the screen here. Scott M2, you are currently muted if you'd like to unmute yourself. We're going to be listening to you next, and you've done a really interesting series of YouTube posts lately, and I guess this is kind of a part of that series, or at least it says so in the intro. And I think the music that you've been putting out as a part of that is really interesting, and I think it's worthy of people giving it a listen if they haven't already. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I made a little prologue for my video, but my main band is dreamSTATE. It's a duo with Jamie Todd, and we do a lot of improvisations and things. And with all the social distancing that's going on now, we're being good, and I haven't seen them for months. And so instead, I'm trying to do a series of solo performances. And we love playing outside. Jamie's got a big backyard, and sometimes we play at people's cottages and things like that. And it's something special for me. So I'm trying to do a series for spring this year, posting something every week with the trees behind me and such. And but just doing it myself. And so it's good because it's pushed me into solo modular more. And I am enjoying it. So yeah, I call it Springscapes on YouTube.
Cool. So with that, let's give your track a listen. I did have the opportunity to listen to it earlier before we came online, and it's really interesting. So I hope everybody enjoys it. And let me share that screen and get that started. Here we go. Nicely done. Nicely done. Lots of great comments from the chat sessions as well. Yeah.
Well, thanks everybody. Yeah, honestly, I'm disappointed with the sound because I had it recorded direct to my little Zoom and stuff like that. So I probably will try to re-upload this to Springscapes just for the full spectrum. But thanks, Paul.
Yeah, feel free. I did notice that the levels got a little bit hot in here. So I did bring the volume down. I didn't get any feedback from asking if doing that helped the sound at all. But hopefully it did. I don't know.
Thanks.
It's YouTube. It compresses. There's not much we can do about that.
I'll keep learning.
Yeah. So it's a constant learning battle. Anybody have any questions for Scott about that?
Scott, did you have somebody handling your the camera for you?
No. I have had one camera on a tripod shooting at me, and I had my phone on a mic stand above the gear, and then afterwards I just lined it all up in Vegas and did transitions and such like that. I just I hit a key and I go, and then I look for the spikes.
Right.
Yep. It's old tech, but it works. That's why they have it. Okay, so this is if there's no other questions, this is going to take us to our last video, and this is one where I will have to ask forgiveness because I did not ask permission. It is my band. I did have a large part in this. I just wanted to point out, though, that some of you may have seen me drinking some whiskey, and the whiskey I'm drinking is from 40 Creek. It's called Unity. I don't know if you can still get it. It flew off the shelves whenever it was available, but I'm drinking Unity in the hopes that we can all be together again soon. So on to the next video, and I talked earlier about what we wanted to do for next month's Frequency Freaks, and that's a collaborative thing. Something that kind of happened a little bit by accident with my band, the Canadian Electronic Ensemble, is we started doing a series of things in a Renga cycle. So it started by accident. I had a drone that I had made for John Farah because he was over in Germany when this whole isolation thing kind of started and COVID hit, and I wanted to help take his mind off that and let him know that he wasn't alone. So I made this drone for him, and one thing led to another. He ended up getting the call from the consulate to come back to Canada. He hadn't done anything with it yet. And the CEE started talking about trying to do something together in some way. And there were a number of years ago, I had this idea to pass the track when we couldn't get together. The idea is one person records a track, passes it to the next, or to the group, and then the next person takes it over and adds their track, and so on and so forth. There are 6 of us in the band. So there are 6 of us who have contributed to this, one after the other. Rose Bolton has done just an absolutely fantastic mix on this, which is why I chose her mix. The other interesting thing is that we've got 2 or 3 different mixes, maybe 4 different mixes of this, the first track that we've done this way. We're working on our 4th now. And each of the mixes almost sounds like a completely different piece of music. So that's something that's really interesting. The other thing that I wanted to do was challenge myself to do some video art. And I've had this program called Resolume Avenue for some time for being able to do some video art. And I used that to do the video on this. It's actually a combination of tools. The vast majority of the clips are clips that I'm blending together, are clips that I made myself. There are 2 or 3 or 4 in there that are commercially available that I purchased and are included with this. But all the fractal imagery is stuff that I did myself. So I wanted to play this video to kind of show what can be done in collaboration, even though we can't be together, because it has been really good for us. It's helped us stay in touch. It's helped us creatively, and there's been some really good music that's come out of it as well, or at least I think so. So I'm going to play that for you all now, and we'll see you back here in about 13 minutes or so. And we're back. I should have mentioned that even though it wasn't a live studio performance of the music, the video was performed live. Well, quasi-live.
What program did you use to generate it?
I used a program called Resolume.
Resolume, right.
Yeah. They have two
nice.
versions. One's called Arena, the other one's called Avenue. Arena is really made for being used in big arenas and includes object mapping and stuff like that. Arena is more for the solo user, single user kind of thing. So the video clips were made in Fractal Architect on the Macintosh. That's a question from Mild Head Wound. Sorry. Sorry for bastardizing your name there. Did not mean to do that. But yeah, Resolume was used for controlling everything and compositing everything and compiling everything together in real time. And the video clips themselves, they were mostly done in Fractal Architect, and there were a couple of other ones that were thrown in there. The things that looked like lights behind warped glass and stuff like that. Those were in there. Some of that was effect, though, so it really did kind of blur the line between what was video clip and what was going on in real time in terms of what I was controlling.
What about the actual performance, the recording process? Did you follow did one person do a stem and then hand that off to the next person, or was there feedback? Was it sort of a one-shot thing? Were there any kind of creative restrictions or creative rules that were applied to it?
No, we don't apply creative rules. Not often, anyway. Sometimes when we're doing an improvisation, we'll say we will restrict each person to a particular frequency band. And, somebody will play in the upper register, middle register, lower level, upper mids, lower mids, whatever that happens to be. There's 6 of us. So there are a lot of different ranges that you have to split the frequency range up into for that. Mm-hmm. And yeah, we go outside every once in a while outside of those frequency ranges when we do that. Sometimes, we'll do something like play very quietly, only play very quiet sounds. And so, yeah, there have been rules and restrictions from time to time, but on this, there weren't any, and there aren't usually. So it's pass the track out to the group. The next person takes it, adds their stem to it. The next person takes those 2 stems into their DAW and records whatever they want to record over top of that. For a band that's used to doing things real time, it's very different when we have the luxury of time on our side and we can actually take some time with the sounds that the others have made and add our voice to that. Mm-hmm. So it's been a really different exercise for us. It's been a lot of fun, and it has also brought some sanity to our lives. So, yeah. Are there any other questions, coming from anybody, I'll watch for those while I close off here. I wanted to thank everybody who attended, because it would be really silly for the 6 of us being in here and doing this if you weren't out there listening to us. So we want to thank you for making it worth our while doing this. It's very much appreciated. And I hope that what we're doing here inspires you to go and create some music. I'm looking forward to getting emails for people who want to collaborate for the next edition, which, if memory serves, is on June 16th. I might have to look that up if I have a moment. We have a mailing list that you can subscribe to. Just go to our website at frequencyfreaks.com and you can subscribe to the mailing list. We have a Facebook group. Fill out the questionnaire, ask to join. We'll let you in. We're not, we're not that unfriendly. The questionnaire is designed to keep out the riffraff. With that, does anybody else from the panel, do you guys have anything that you want to add before we all sign off?
Great job coordinating.
Oh, I'd just like to.
Paul.
Thanks.
You took the words out of my mouth. I was going to say it's a lot of effort and technological know-how to get this off the ground, and we do appreciate you putting it together.
Well, thank you very much. Having you all here and being able to do this together makes it all worthwhile. So thank you so much. And with that, we'll say goodbye. I wish everybody the best. Stay healthy, stay safe. Just because the restrictions are easing doesn't mean the virus has gone away. We still have to deal with that. So I hope to see you all in person soon. Take care.
Thanks.